Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to talk about my favourite reads of 2018. Overall, there were quite a few books that I really liked this year and I'm definitely getting better at picking the books that I know I'll enjoy. But today I want to talk about just 6 books that impressed me so much after I read them that I gave them the very rare rating of 5 stars. This is not something I do often, and in 2017 there was only one book that I gave 5 stars to. So to go from one book to 6 that got 5 stars is quite an improvement for me. Let's get straight into those books then. I'll talk you through them in the order that I read them in, and I'm going to briefly discuss each book on the list, but if you want a more in-detail review, then check out my playlist of monthly wrap-ups that will be linked in the description box. And you can then go to the month in which I read the book, which I'll also mention in this video, and listen to the full review if you're interested. The first 5-star read was a book that I came across all the way back in January, and that was A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Charlie, who used to be on this channel with me, lent me this novel because she thought I'd enjoy it. And at first glance, this really doesn't seem like the book for me. It's science fiction, which is a genre that I don't read much at all, and it's aimed at young adult audiences, whereas most of the books I enjoy tend to be adult fiction. It's a relatively new release from 2015, I believe, and the story follows the crew and passengers on a spaceship flying through the universe. It really doesn't sound like my kind of book, but unsurprisingly for you, because it's in this video, but very surprisingly for me back in January, I really loved this book. The focus of this story is on the characters, who are all very different sort of people and aliens, and the spaceship provides a wonderful setting for these characters to interact with each other. That means that the actual plot of the book is very slow-paced and really not much happens. But that doesn't matter because of the fantastic outer space setting and the really beautifully written characters. This is a really fun and also really quiet sort of read, and I'm so glad that it was recommended to me because I never would have picked this book off the shelf for myself. The second 5-star read of the year was The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, which I read in February. This was one of the books that I bought last year for a £5 charity shop challenge that I did with Charlie, and I got this one for just over 30p in one of the local charity shops. Now that's what I call value for money, because this book was just gorgeous. It's from 1989, but it's set in the 1950s, and the story follows a butler named Stevens, who takes a week-long road trip to the West Country. On the way there, he remembers events from throughout his career at Darlington Hall, where he is employed as a butler. His musings and his memories are all very subjective, and he is the perfect unreliable narrator. The book overall is very subtle, both in its humour and its emotionality, but that's where the strengths lie. This is by far the most English book I have ever read, and it works so well because of how amazingly well the main character is written. Nothing much actually happens in this book, again, but the reader is so immersed in Stephen's thoughts and memories that it makes for a surprisingly gripping read, despite the lack of plot. This book, though, like I said, incredibly subtle, made me laugh and it made me cry, and it is beautiful. My next 5-star read was Howard's End by Ian Forster, which I read in April. This is, of course, another charity shop find, and I took this one to Germany with me when I last went to see my parents. I had read 2 other Forster novels before, so I knew I was going to like this one, but I didn't know it would become a new favourite. This novel from 1910 is centred around 2 sisters, Helen and Margaret, who are young and rich and living a bohemian life in London. In the course of the book, they encounter 2 other very different families. The rich and conventional Wilcoxes, who made their money in the colonies, and the Basts, who are only just coping both in their marriage and their finances. Really, this book is an exploration of the British middle class at the turn of the century, and I can't really do it justice by just trying to explain the plot, when really the beauty of the book lies in its observations of that very rigid British class system, and also how human relationships play out within that system. This is the theme that Forster explores in his other books too, and how it's ended is also blended with a very beautiful, poetic style and intelligent and subtle humour that I enjoyed a lot. This is a book that puts up liberal values against conventionality and security, while at the same time pointing out the faults of both ideals. In May, I read my next 5-star read, which was Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail, Honeyman. This book has been talked about a lot on BookTube, and I'm sure you've either read it or heard about it. It's a relatively new release from 2017, and I got my copy from a colleague. This is the story of a woman in her early 30s who works a completely normal office job in Glasgow and is convinced that she leads a perfectly normal and unassuming life, except that at the weekend she drinks 2 bottles of vodka every weekend. As the plot unfolds, we get an idea that there is some sort of dark secret in her past, but the book does a fantastic job of not sliding into a cheap mystery. While the element of mystery is certainly an aspect of the story, the book really is driven by the character of Eleanor herself and the way that she sees the world. This is really, really funny and heartwarming, and a lot deeper than you first expect when you open the book and read the first chapter. I don't want to give away any plot spoilers, but in the course of the story we see Eleanor break out of the routine of her life and encounter new people and face some big challenges, one of which is confronting her past. The next book on this list is really quite special because it's the first and so far only non-fiction book that I've ever given 5 stars to, and that book is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge. In July I listened to the audiobook, which is also read by the author. As the title suggests, this is a book about the author's frustration of discussing race with white people. However, this is just the frame for a discussion about race that includes interviews, historical sources, and the author's lived experience, and is surprisingly in-depth considering it's such a short book. The writing style is very straightforward and accessible, which I really appreciated since I sometimes find it hard to keep up with non-fiction. I like how Reni Eddo-Lodge combines personal experience with history and factual research to make her point, and all of these aspects are very seamlessly woven together to create a really compelling discussion. Reni Eddo-Lodge is a British author, so this book is mainly concerned with British culture and discourse around race, but I would highly recommend reading or listening to it wherever you are in the world. And the last 5-star read of the year was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Bronte, which I read in the context of Victober this year. I went into this book not knowing anything about the story, and I'm really glad that I did, because there are quite a few mysterious elements that you don't really want to know before you open the book. So with that in mind, here is my non-spoilery summary. The novel is really 2 stories, with one framing the other. It begins and ends with a series of letters by a man called Gilbert Markham, in which he recounts his days as a young man in a small village when a mysterious widow moves into an old manor house in the neighbourhood with her small son. There is a lot of gossip around that woman and her past, and she encounters quite a bit of hostility from the locals. Markham is intrigued and wants to find out more about her. Then, in the middle part of the book, the perspective switches to that of the woman, and through her diaries we find out about her past. Instead of dealing with gossip and small-town politics, her story is much more focused on the personal. There is a lot of discussion of marriages and relationships between men and women, with some very realistic and disturbing portrayals of abusive relationships and also just of bad relationships. The strength of this book lies in the beautiful blend of realism and humour, with a very gorgeous and unpretentious writing style. It reads much more modern than it actually is, almost like a historical novel rather than a book written in the mid-19th century. And it was definitely the highlight of my Victober reading. I think I like this more than Jane Eyre. And this was it, my 6 outstanding reads of the year. As you can tell, these books are all quite similar despite the variety of genres and publication years. 2018 was the year in which I discovered just how much I loved slow-paced, introspective, character-focused narratives, so I'm sure to find even more of those next year. Please let me know if you've read any of those books or are planning to read any of them in 2019, and also tell me what were your outstanding and possibly surprising reads of the year. Thank you very much for watching. Bye!